You know, history often gives us these, well, simplified versions of really complex times, doesn't it? Especially when we talk about identity.
Yeah, it really does. We tend to look back using our modern ideas,
Mm.
things like nation states, ethnic identity.
Exactly, ideas that came much later. But what if, like, our whole understanding of identity in a huge empire, say the Ottomans, what if it's been totally shaped by those later ideas and not by how things actually were back then?
That is precisely the deep dive we're jumping into today. We're
Hmm.
calling it the Balkan Peoples under the Ottomans.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll be using the sources to really unpack the very nuanced reality of identity, religion, power, all of it during Ottoman rule there.
Okay.
We're going to focus on the millet system, which is fascinating how communities were organized by faith,
Mm-hmm.
and also look into conversions to Islam, which is often really misunderstood,
Uh-huh.
and the special status of some vassal states.
Right. So our mission here is to really challenge those traditional views. We want to uncover some maybe surprising facts about how people in the Balkans actually saw themselves, how they lived, how they dealt with Ottoman authority. Prepare for maybe a few aha moments, perhaps. Okay, let's unpack this. So maybe the first really big surprise here is this. For most people in the Ottoman Balkans, identity wasn't about being, say, Serb or Bulgarian like we think of it now. It was mainly about their religion.
Exactly. The sources are quite clear on this. Later on, Western and even Balkan history writing really focused on ethnicity, but before the late 18th century. Religion was fundamental.
So ethnicity based on language wasn't a big deal then.
It played a pretty minor role, actually. People identified much more with where they lived, their region.
Interesting.
And this is where the millet system comes in. It's absolutely central to understanding this. It was the key Ottoman institution for non-Muslims, the Zimmis, the protected people.
Right, the Zim.
And this system, it was quite clever, really. It allowed these communities to keep their religious beliefs, their traditions, mostly separate from their Muslim rulers, and in relative security. It gave them representation, through their religious leaders, and a fair bit of local autonomy. So that millet identity, that was paramount.
Even though the millets themselves weren't ethnically uniform.
Precisely. Each millet contained quite diverse groups, linguistically and culturally.
Okay, that makes sense. A system to keep groups distinct but also protected. And you mentioned the Orthodox millet was huge.
Enormous. And what's really striking is how Greek speakers dominated it from the very beginning.
How did that happen? And why did the Greek clergy actually seem to get more powerful under the Ottomans? That seems counterintuitive.
It does, but it makes sense from the Ottoman perspective. When Sultan Mehmed II set up the system in 1454, he put the Greek patriarch right at the head. So boom, the administration of this massive Orthodox community is effectively in Greek hands. And the reason they gained power? Well, Mehmed wanted his Islamic empire to basically replace the old Byzantine one. He liked its autocratic traditions, its institutions. So he found the existing Greek church structure really useful for managing all those Orthodox subjects. It served his purposes.
Right. So that must have put the Slavic Orthodox churches, like the Serbian and Bulgarian ones, in a bit of a difficult position.
It certainly did.
Yeah.
Their independent churches were placed directly under the Greek Patriarchate in Constantinople. The Bulgarian Patriarchate at Trnovo was just abolished, or it was reduced to an archbishopric and usually headed by Greeks.
Wow.
But there's a twist. The Serbian Patriarchate of Peć, it was actually reestablished in 1557.
Oh, how did that happen?
It was thanks to the Grand Vizier, Mehmed Sokolu. He was actually a convert himself from an Orthodox background. So that allowed for Slavic-speaking clergy again. Though the Greek Patriarchate wasn't exactly thrilled and kept pushing back against its autonomy.
I can imagine. And the cultural impact of all this Greek dominance, did it stifle Slavic culture?
In the towns, yes, to a degree. Greek church leaders tended to prioritize Greek cultural activities. Non-Greek speakers often found themselves stuck in the lower levels of the church hierarchy. But here's where you see this amazing resilience. Private patrons stepped up. Wealthy rural families, urban guilds, merchants. They funded Slavic schools, literature, art. They kept the culture alive despite the official church structure.
That's incredible.
It's also interesting that Church Slavic, like liturgical Greek, eventually became pretty much unintelligible to ordinary people. It was more of a mystical church language.
Right, not everyday speech. So, okay, beyond the huge Orthodox millet, what about other Christians? You mentioned the Armenian millet had a surprisingly broad role.
Yeah, that's another fascinating piece. Theoretically, it represented Gregorian Monophysite Christians who were mostly outside the Balkans. But when Mehmed set it up in 1461, appointing an Armenian patriarch in Istanbul, he gave it administrative responsibility for all the non-Orthodox Christian zimmies in the Balkans.
All of them. Like who?
Well, scattered groups of so-called heretics, like Bogomils, Paulicians, various gypsy groups, and importantly, Roman Catholics. And in many Balkan areas, the Catholics actually outnumbered the Armenians. So if you're Catholic in Bosnia, say, your link to the Ottoman state ran through the Armenian Patriarchate.
Wow. Okay. That's complex. And then the Jewish millet, you said they had unique tolerance. How so compared to Europe?
Well, the sources really highlight this. Ottoman tolerance towards Jews was frankly unparalleled in Europe at that time.
Yeah.
You see it most clearly with the huge immigration, maybe 90,000 Sephardic Jews fleeing the Reconquista and Inquisition in Spain and Portugal.
90,000, that's massive.
It is, and they were welcomed. Their skills in commerce, finance, crafts, medicine, highly valued. Thessaloniki, or Salonika, famously became known as the Jewish city. Now, there were differences within the Jewish community, the Sephardim, many following Karaite tradition focusing on written Torah, and the smaller Ashkenazi community, more traditional rabbinites. But the Sephardic community, because of their numbers and skills, had a definite economic and administrative edge, and even quite a bit of influence at the Sultan's court.
So the millet system created these really distinct religious boxes, it sounds like. But you mentioned one group, the Phanariotes, who sort of transcended that. Who were they?
The Phanariotes. They're a really interesting exception. They were the only non-Jewish Balkan zimmies whose identity really went beyond just their millet. What happened was, Mehmed II actually encouraged Greek merchants with skills, maritime, military, commercial, to come back to Istanbul. He gave them their own district, Phanar, or Phanar in Greek.
Okay, Phanariotes, got it.
Exactly. And these families became incredibly powerful. They quickly dominated Ottoman trade, shipping, the navy. Eventually, they pretty much controlled the empire's whole economic life, domestic and international.
Wow, and they were Orthodox.
Yes, and because the high-up Orthodox church leaders were consistently chosen from their ranks, they effectively ran the Orthodox millet too. They were, without doubt, the wealthiest, most powerful zimmi group. Full stop.
So a tiny, powerful elite. How did their identity compare to, say, the average Greek peasant or artisan? Was it the same?
Oh, completely different worlds. That's a really crucial distinction. The vast majority of Greeks, peasants, artisans, their identity was still primarily shaped by belonging to the Orthodox millet and by their job. They relied on oral traditions, their local world, very different from the Phanariots.
Right.
And education for most zimmis, remember, was religious, tied to churches, monasteries, synagogues, taught in Hebrew, Latin, Byzantine Greek, Church Slavic.
So wrapping up this part on identity, what does it all mean?
It means that before the modern era, identity in the Ottoman Balkans was overwhelmingly religious. It was this complex tapestry woven by the millet system, not really about ethnic nationalism as we understand it today.
That really does shift the perspective. Okay, let's move to another, often really contentious topic. Conversion to Islam under the Ottomans. You can see the upsides, right? Freedom from zimmi rules, those extra taxes. But there was a social cost, too.
Absolutely. When someone converted, they legally left their old millet, got new rights, new obligations. But yeah, their old community might see them as traitors or just let them in as Turks.
Which raises that big question. Why did people convert? Was it forced? Many traditional stories claim it was.
Right, and that's where the sources get really interesting. They pretty directly challenge those common European academic ideas about conversions being mainly forced or people being secret crypto-Christians.
The evidence isn't there?
The historical evidence just doesn't really support widespread forced conversion.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. The Ottomans needed the zimmis. They were a huge source of tax revenue.
Good point.
The whole millet system was designed to preserve these communities, not eliminate them. So if it wasn't mainly forced, what was driving conversions?
Okay, so the research leans away from forced conversion, but I know many listeners might still find that surprising given the popular narratives. What genuine factors do the sources point to?
Yeah, it's important to dig into that. The sources suggest several voluntary factors were at play. One big one was simple self-interest.
Like preserving property, social status.
Exactly. Avoiding those discriminatory taxes and restrictions, just making life easier, essentially.
Makes sense.
Another really fascinating factor was the Sufi movement, specifically the dervish orders. These were kind of like Islamic monastic orders. They often traveled with the Ottoman armies and were active in newly conquered areas.
And they helped conversions. How?
What's really surprising is how syncretistic, how blending some of them were. They often incorporated Christian practices venerating saints, confession, communion. The Bektashi order, for example, apparently even used the sign of the cross as a gesture of respect.
No way.
Yeah. So they kind of blended folk Islam with folk Christianity, which really appealed to people in the countryside. Made Islam seem less alien, perhaps.
Interesting. Any other factors?
Military service was another big one. Christian nobles, the Sipahis or cavalrymen who joined the Ottoman military, often gradually converted over time. And you had auxiliary units, Yahyas infantry, Muslims cavalry, Akinsis raiders, where Christians joined up maybe to escape being a peasant, and many eventually converted.
So joining the army was a pathway.
It seems so. Even Turkish-speaking nomads from Anatolia, the Yureks, who settled in the Balkans, assimilated some Balkan Christians into Muslim ranks through military service too.
It's definitely a much more complex picture than just forced conversion. What about specific regions? Were there hotspots of conversion like Bosnia or Bulgaria?
Yeah, the regional examples are really telling. Bosnia and Albania stand out. The sources suggest conversions there were indisputably voluntary.
Okay. What drove it in Bosnia? I've heard theories about the Bogomils.
Right, the traditional idea was mass conversion of Bogomils. But recent research kind of debunks widespread Bogomilism there. It seems the Bosnian church was more likely a Catholic offshoot and maybe not that popular anyway. Instead, conversions in Bosnia looked linked to the aristocracy's typical self-interest, using religion as a political tool in their rivalries.
Ah, power politics.
Pretty much. And places like Sarajevo and Mostar became major Islamic cultural centers. Bosnian converts even got special privileges, like controlling local administration. At one point, they even banned Ottoman troops from Sarajevo.
Really? That's quite something. What about Catholics converting elsewhere?
Well, a couple of possible factors.
Yeah.
Catholicism was the religion of Ottoman enemies. The Habsburgs, the Pope. So Catholics might have been viewed with more suspicion. Plus, remember, they were under the Armenian Millet administratively. Headed by a patriarch they saw as heretical.
Right. That must have been awkward.
So maybe for some, converting to Islam seemed like a morally correct or at least preferable alternative to being under Armenian authority.
And Bulgaria. There are strong traditions there about forced conversions, aren't there?
There are, particularly stories linked to Sultan Selim I or the Rhodope Mountains in the mid-17th century. But again, recent scholarship casts grave doubt on these specific claims of forced mass conversion.
How so?
Well, the Rhodope evidence, for instance, has been identified as likely 19th century forgeries. The thinking now is that conversions in Bulgaria were probably driven by the same general factors we see elsewhere: self-interest, Susi influence, military service, not some official policy of coercion.
Okay, so we've looked at the millet system, identity conversion. Let's shift to that third group, the Ottoman vassals. I'm guessing being a vassal wasn't the same for everyone.
Not at all. Vassalage under the Ottomans was a real spectrum. For most states, it was just a step towards being completely taken over. For others, like some Western enemies, it might just mean paying some nominal fee. But by the mid-1500s, our sources show only 3 client vassals really survived in the Balkans: Wallachia, Moldavia, and the Republic of Dubrovnik.
Okay, let's tackle the Romanian principalities first, Wallachia and Moldavia. What did their vassalage look like initially?
Well, initially their deal involved paying an annual tribute, offering various gifts to the Sultan, paying taxes, and allowing Ottoman garrisons in key fortresses. They also had to keep their foreign policy generally in line with the Ottomans.
But in return?
In return, they kept quite a bit of independence, both domestically and in foreign affairs, at least until 1714, when the Ottomans took away their right to elect their own rulers. And there was hardly any Muslim settlement there, mostly just in those forts.
Okay. And internally, what was the power dynamic like with their rulers, the voivodes?
Well, theoretically, the Romanian voivodes or princes were absolute rulers. But in practice, because they were elected, they were limited. They really depended on the loyalty of the big landowners, the boyars, and the top Orthodox church guys.
And how did they keep them loyal?
Often they had to basically buy their support by giving away state land, which over time really weakened the prince's power.
And I guess that wasn't great for the peasants.
Not at all. It worsened their situation significantly. Many increasingly became like serfs. This period also saw the rise and fall of Mihai the Brave.
Ah, yes, Michael the Brave.
Right, around 1593 to 1601. He was the last really strong prince, even briefly united Wallachia, Moldavia, and Transylvania. He tried to push back against Ottoman control, but ultimately failed and was murdered. His death really paved the way for the boyars to gain even more control. It's often called the Boyar's Century in Romanian history.
That sounds like a messy situation the Ottomans could exploit, did they?
Oh, absolutely. They were very pragmatic about it. They actively encouraged frequent princely elections. Why?
More gifts for the Sultan each time.
Exactly. More gifts. And it kept the rulers weak and easier to manage. But even more critically, they used the economic side of vassalage. They claimed rights to buy Romanian goods, first things like sheep, grain, and paid below market price through their own agents.
Creating an Ottoman monopoly.
Essentially, yes. An economic stranglehold that bypassed the local rulers completely and really undermined their autonomy.
And where did this ultimately lead? I suspect those phanariotes we talked about earlier might come back into the picture here.
You nailed it. This decline in princely power and the Ottoman economic grip created the perfect opening for the Phanerio Greeks. They started moving into the principalities around the mid-17th century, held by the Greek Orthodox Church and the Ottomans.
Using their wealth?
Precisely. Their money bought them top church positions and those profitable Ottoman trade commissions. By the early 18th century, they'd basically pushed out the native Romanian boys and were ruling Wallachia and Moldavia themselves.
So the local Romanians effectively became zimmes under Greek phanariot rule.
That's pretty much what happened. Despite their history as vassals, they ended up in a similar position to other conquered peoples.
Want a turnaround? Okay, but then there's the third vassal, Dubrovnik. You said their experience was totally different.
Completely different. The Republic of Dubrovnik is unique. The Ottomans basically never interfered in its internal affairs. They never invaded its territory on the Adriatic coast, and crucially, its citizens were not officially considered zimmies.
Not zimmies, why not?
For Dubrovnik, being an Ottoman vassal was purely about mutual economic benefit. It wasn't about submission in the same way.
Tell us a bit about Dubrovnik itself.
Well, it had a history under Venice, then became independent under Hungarian protection. It developed stable Republican government councils, a senate run by nobles, but with real influence from merchants, artisans, ship captains, and importantly, its peasants managed to stay free. They weren't turned into serfs.
So, a stable republic, what was the deal they struck with the Ottomans?
It was very pragmatic. A treaty in 1458 gave Dubrovnik Ottoman protection, wide-ranging trade rights, and freedom to set up trading colonies all over the Balkans.
And in return?
They paid tribute. But look what the Ottomans got. Access to a ready-made, sophisticated trade network. It created a unified trade zone across the Balkans, removing customs barriers.
In Dubrovnik?
Dubrovnik got free access to the entire Balkan market, plus most favored nation status, with really low customs duties. It was a win-win.
So they stuck with it, even under pressure from Europe.
Absolutely. They resisted pressure to break the treaty and remained the most independent Ottoman vassal right up until the early 19th century.
That is remarkable. Why? Why did they manage to keep that independence when Wallachia and Moldavia lost theirs?
Several key things. One, the Ottomans didn't really know how to deal with a republic, a corporate state. There's no single prince to bribe or manipulate.
No single point of leverage.
Exactly. And crucially, the Ottomans needed Dubrovnik's commercial role. If they'd reduced Dubrovnik's traders within the empire to zimmy status, it would have messed up trade, which wasn't in their interest.
So it was mutual need.
Very much so. Dubrovnik even maintained its own diplomats, its own protocols. They even put limits on bribes they'd pay. And get this. The Ottomans sometimes actively defended Dubrovnik militarily against European rivals like Venice.
They defended their vassal against European.
Yes, to protect their valuable trading partner.
That really underscores how unique that relationship was. What about Dubrovnik's cultural role? Was it just about trade?
Oh no, far from it. Its unique position made it incredibly important culturally. It was genuinely the Balkans opening to the West during the Ottoman centuries. It blended Italian Renaissance models with local Slavic culture. Its thinkers were part of mainstream European thought. Marin Getaldic, for instance, was involved in the scientific revolution.
Impressive.
But maybe its biggest cultural contribution was literature, especially in the Slavic language. Ivan Gundulich's epic poem, Osman, is a famous example. It celebrated Dubrovnik, but also, kind of prophetically, looked forward to the liberation of Balkan Slavs.
Wow. So its influence went way beyond its small size.
Definitely. Culturally and economically, Dubrovnik punched far above its weight in the Ottoman Balkans.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's just so clear, isn't it? The Ottoman era in the Balkans was incredibly complex, way more defined by religion than the modern ethnic nationalisms we often project onto it. We've seen the millet system creating these distinct religious identities. We've seen conversion to Islam as largely voluntary, driven by all sorts of
Right,
factors.
self-interest, Sufism, military life.
And vassalage wasn't one thing. It ranged from being pretty exploitative in the Romanian case to this incredibly independent partnership with Dubrovnik.
Exactly. The main takeaway has to be that identity back then was fluid, it was multifaceted. Religion, economic opportunity, social status, political reality, all these things shaped it. It's just so much richer, so much more nuanced than a simple story of conqueror versus conquered.
So here's something to think about. How do these really deep historical layers, this time when religion was paramount, not ethnicity, when communities adapted in all these surprising ways, how do they still resonate today? In the diverse identities, the competing narratives, perhaps, of the Balkan peoples, what new perspectives could understanding this complexity offer us for appreciating the region's incredibly rich and, yeah, often misunderstood heritage?